Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're tackling something pretty epic.
Oh, yeah, it's a big one. We're going after El Dorado.
El Dorado, the city of gold. I mean, who hasn't heard of El Dorado, right? But seriously, where did this legend come from?
And is there any truth to it?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out.
That's right. So, by the end of this deep dive, you'll know a lot more about where this legend came from.
The real historical figures and events that kept it going.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll come away with some questions of your own, to spark your own exploration of El Dorado.
I love that. Okay, so let's get into it. What's the first thing we need to know about El Dorado?
Well, what's really interesting about El Dorado is that it wasn't always thought of as a city. It actually started with a real ritual.
A ritual?
Yeah, a ritual practiced by the Muisca people. They lived around Lake Guatavita in what's now Colombia. Okay, wait, hold on. A real ritual. Now you've got to tell me more about this. I'm already picturing something super elaborate.
You're not wrong. Picture this. A new Muisca ruler. Their entire body covered in gold dust.
Okay, I'm listening. Covered in gold dust. Then what?
They stand on this raft. It's all decked out with treasures.
Treasures Lake.
Emeralds, gold figurines, you name it, it's all there. And as the sun rises, this raft is taken out onto the sacred lake.
Oh, wow. Okay, now that's a visual. All that gold glistening under the morning sun. It must have been an amazing sight to see. But what was the point of all this? Why all the gold and the treasures?
It was all about connecting with the divine. For the Muisca, gold represented the seed of life.
The seed of life.
Yeah, a powerful symbol of power and fertility. And by offering these precious items to the gods, the new ruler was basically solidifying their authority. They were ensuring the prosperity of their people.
That's incredible. So this wasn't just some ancient tale. It was a real ceremony with real meaning. But how do we know for sure that it actually happened?
Well, it's not just a story. Archaeologists have found Muisca raft artifacts, the actual rafts. These confirm that these ceremonies did, in fact, take place.
Wow, so there's physical evidence to back it all up. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But how did this specific ritual, this gold-covered ruler on a raft, become the legend of El Dorado, a whole city made of gold? I mean, that's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Now we've got to bring in the Spanish conquistadors.
Oh, here come the conquistadors.
They arrive in South America in the 16th century, and they are absolutely obsessed with gold.
I mean, when you think about conquistadors, gold is kind of their thing, right?
To them, gold was the ultimate symbol of power and wealth.
It's funny, when I think about the conquistadors, I always think about Christopher Columbus and his journals. They were full of talk about gold. He was completely fixated on it. So I can only imagine how the conquistadors reacted when they heard about this ritual with a ruler covered in gold.
Oh, they were immediately intrigued. They heard the tales of this gold-covered ruler, and they dubbed him El Dorado.
El Dorado.
Literally translates to the golden one. But here's the thing. Their obsession with gold, plus their European worldview, well, it kind of led them to misinterpret what they were hearing.
Okay, so how did their worldview play into the legend of El Dorado changing?
Well, back then, many Europeans believed that the regions near the equator were just overflowing with gold.
Overflowing with gold.
This belief came from ancient myths, rumors, wishful thinking, all mixed together. So when the conquistadors landed in South America, they were already primed to believe that crazy riches were just waiting to be found.
They were ready to believe, weren't they?
So that story of El Dorado, the one that started with a single ruler offering gold to the gods, it got twisted. It became a story about a whole city paved with gold, fueled by European desire and ambition.
So you've got this captivating ritual, then you throw in the conquistadors and their lust for gold and their preconceived notions about all this wealth just lying around. It's like the perfect recipe for a legend to take on a life of its own. It's amazing how something so simple can morph into something so grand, so different from where it started.
It really is. It's a fascinating example of how perceptions can shape reality, especially when you add in something as powerful as the allure of gold.
It makes you wonder, what other legends and myths might have started out as something pretty ordinary, only to be transformed by different cultures and desires over time.
That's a great point. And speaking of desires, the legend of El Dorado didn't just capture imaginations. It fueled some pretty daring expeditions.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
We're talking about explorers risking everything to find this mythical city of gold.
Okay, I'm ready. Bring on the explorers and their adventures. I bet they're full of danger and maybe even a little madness.
Oh, you are not wrong about that. Let's start with the story of Vasco Núñez de Balboa. You probably remember him. He was the first European to cross the Isthmus of Panama.
Oh yeah, Balboa. I remember learning about him in history class. He was the one who reached the Pacific Ocean, right?
That's him. But Balboa wasn't just focused on reaching the other side of Panama. He was also looking for gold.
Makes sense. It was the 1500s. Everyone was after gold, weren't they?
Exactly. And while he was making his way across Panama, he was talking to the indigenous people, gathering information about wealthy empires.
So he's chatting with the locals, trying to get the inside scoop on where the gold is. Classic conquistador move.
And get this, during his travels, he hears about this land to the south. It's supposed to be incredibly rich in gold.
Okay, richer than the empires they already knew about.
The stories said that even the common people in this land used gold for everyday stuff.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty compelling story. Did Balboa ever find this land?
He didn't. His main goal was reaching the Pacific, and he actually died before he could really explore those southern regions. But the stories he heard about that wealthy empire, they just added fuel to the fire of the El Dorado legend.
Yeah, it's like every whisper of gold, every rumor, just made the myth even stronger. But did all of those whispers turn out to be true?
Well, some explorers were a little more careful about the information they gathered.
More careful, like fact-checking the rumors before setting off on a wild goose chase.
Exactly. One of those explorers was Pascual de Andagoya.
Andagoya. Okay, what did he do?
Well, he also traveled through Panama around the same time as Balboa. He also heard stories from indigenous people about a land overflowing with gold. They called it Biru.
Biru? That sounds like it could be El Dorado.
Andagoya thought so too. He was really intrigued by these accounts, and he even managed to get a few gold trinkets from this mysterious land.
Oh, wow. Physical proof. I bet those trinkets really got people's imaginations going. So did Andagoya ever make it to Biru?
He didn't. He got sick during his travels and had to go back to Panama.
Oh, that's too bad. Sounds like these expeditions were pretty rough.
They really were. These explorers faced all kinds of danger. They were traveling through uncharted territories, battling diseases, dealing with hostile indigenous populations. It was tough.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's easy to get swept up in the excitement of the gold and the adventure, but these journeys must have been brutal.
They absolutely were. And it shows just how much these explorers believed in the promise of El Dorado. They were willing to risk everything for it. One example that really stands out is Hernán Pérez de Quesada.
Okay, Hernán Pérez de Quesada, what happened to him?
Well, he led an expedition to the Colombian Andes in the 1540s, and they really struggled. The terrain was difficult, they ran out of food, disease was spreading.
This is not sounding good.
It gets worse. Things got so bad that Quesada and his men had to start eating their horses to survive.
Eating their horses? Yikes. Okay, that's a new level of desperate.
It really highlights how tough these expeditions were.
Yeah.
But even when they faced hardships like that, they didn't give up.
It seems crazy. Why didn't they just give up on finding El Dorado? It was clearly a really dangerous quest.
It all comes back to the power of that legend. The stories about cities of gold and wealthy empires, they just kept circulating.
So it was like the more they searched, the more they believed?
Exactly. Even when expeditions failed, the legend of El Dorado didn't die. It just kept changing. And that's where the story of Lope de Aguirre comes in.
Okay, Lope de Aguirre, another explorer. What makes his story stand out?
Well, in the 1560s, he led this expedition down the Amazon River, looking for El Dorado, of course. But things didn't exactly go as planned.
What happened?
It was rough. Hunger, disease, mutiny. The whole journey was just a disaster.
Oh, man, that's awful.
And then Aguirre just kind of snapped.
Snapped.
Yeah, he descended into madness. He ended up massacring a lot of his own men.
Wow, that escalated quickly. So from hardship to mutiny to murder, it sounds like the quest for El Dorado could really bring out the worst in people.
Yeah. It definitely tested their limits. But even with stories like Aguirre's out there, the search for El Dorado didn't stop. And it actually started to shift focus a bit. You see, as expeditions kept failing to find this mythical city, the focus moved to specific indigenous groups that were rumored to be incredibly wealthy.
So they were still looking for gold, but now it was about finding the richest people, not just the city.
Exactly. One group that became a major target was the Omegua people.
The Omegua people, who were they?
They lived along the Amazon River, and the rumors about their wealth, they were pretty wild.
Really? Like how wild?
Well, people were saying that the Omegua had so much gold that they used it for everyday things. Like, imagine plates and cups made of gold.
Wow. That would be insane.
It definitely caught the attention of a lot of explorers. One of them was a German guy named Philippe von Hutten. He led an expedition in the 1540s.
Okay, so what did von Hutten find?
Well, he actually claimed that he almost reached this grand city, ruled by a super powerful king. The city had a temple that was just filled with gold.
So he found El Dorado.
Not quite. Just as he thought he was about to claim the prize, he was driven back by Omega warriors. So close, yet so far.
Man, talk about a tease. It's like El Dorado was this phantom, always just out of reach.
It really is a story of obsession and unfulfilled dreams. And, speaking of obsession, there's one more explorer we need to talk about. Sir Walter Raleigh.
Oh yeah, Sir Walter Raleigh, the famous English explorer. What's his connection to El Dorado?
Raleigh got really obsessed with finding El Dorado in the late 1500s, early 1600s.
So he's getting into the game pretty late, isn't he?
Yeah, but he was determined. He even went as far as capturing another explorer, Antonio de Barrio.
He captured another explorer. Why?
Barrio claimed to know where El Dorado was, somewhere in the Guiana region of South America. So Raleigh basically kidnapped him to get the intel.
Wow. Talk about taking things to the extreme. This is better than any pirate movie I've ever seen.
It really does sound like a movie, doesn't it? It shows just how powerful this obsession with El Dorado was.
So did Raleigh ever find El Dorado using Barrio's information?
Sadly, no. He led 2 expeditions to Guyana, but neither of them were successful. He never found the mythical city.
Oh man, so even with insider information, he couldn't crack the code. But didn't Raleigh have kind of a dramatic end to his own story? Something about imprisonment and execution?
Yeah, his life took a pretty tragic turn after those failed expeditions. There was some political turmoil back in England, and he ended up imprisoned in the Tower of London.
The Tower of London, that's hardcore.
Eventually he was released, but only on the condition that he wouldn't attack any Spanish settlements. But Raleigh, he just couldn't let go of his obsession.
So what did he do?
He went and launched another attack anyway, breaking the terms of his release. That led to his execution.
It's a reminder that chasing after wealth and glory can have a really high price.
Exactly. And even though we know El Dorado is just a myth, the impact of that myth on real people, it was significant. And it wasn't just the explorers who paid the price.
You're talking about the Muisca people.
Yeah, their rituals and culture, they were basically the starting point for this whole El Dorado legend.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the explorers and their adventures. But it's important to remember that there were real people at the heart of this story. What happened to the Muisca?
Well, like a lot of indigenous cultures in the Americas, they suffered greatly at the hands of the Spanish. The arrival of the Europeans brought disease, violence, and displacement. Their sacred sites were desecrated, their traditions disrupted.
It's heartbreaking to think about all the damage that was done in the name of a mythical city.
It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of wealth and power often comes at the expense of others. The El Dorado legend is a powerful example of how history can be distorted and how dangerous unchecked greed can be.
So what can we learn from all of this? After this deep dive into the legend of El Dorado, what's the main takeaway?
I think it's a cautionary tale. It reminds us to be skeptical of narratives that glorify greed and exploitation. And it encourages us to look beyond the surface, to consider the perspectives that are often silenced. The true treasures, they're not always about material wealth. They're about understanding different cultures, respecting the environment, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all living things.
Beautifully said. So, to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an open mind. You never know what hidden treasures you might find along the way. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the legend of El Dorado. Until next time, happy exploring.